Beavemanites and Docutrons, assemble!
Okay, so back in the day, I was way above the wave, man. I traded in the girls for the video games. I played so much Super Smash Bros. Other kids called me names. They called me
Pretty cool, right?
It is.
Yeah, and they brought them back, huh? And they're like $100 now, I think.
It's ridiculous.
Something like that. And we are recording, by the way. This is, welcome to Beavemanites and Docutrons. This is another episode of Beaveman and the Doc, brought to you by Renegade Beaver Studios. And as you know, wherever I am as the Renegade Beaver, that's where Renegade Beaver Studios is. And with me today is Paper Doc. Say hello, Paper Doc. Hey guys, how's it going? It's me, Paper Doc, rocking it out for the rest of you guys. Hey, pretty lady, what you looking at? There's no women in here, Doc. Sit down. That's just a picture on the Polaroid box. Also with me today is our good friend Tromondae, who has not come up with a nickname yet. He might just always go with Tromondae, but whatever. Say hello, Tromondae.
Oh, it is a pretty sweet name though. Not so many people have the name Tromondae.
No, it's very unique. I've never heard it before you. No, of course not.
Yeah, from what I know, there's like about 3 of us in the world.
Is there really?
Yes.
See, we used to think that was the way about my wife's name. And then I actually ran into, well, of course you can run into strippers with that name. But I did run into one of the ladies I used to work with in an emergency room. She was my LPN, and her daughter-in-law's name is the same as my wife's name. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then they subsequently ended up, she ended up working where my wife works.
Really?
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't see what the one that, shut up, Doc.
How many people have the name John?
Oh my God, so many, so many people have that name. It's completely ridiculous. I'm gonna move the mic just a little bit closer to you so you can like really blast out there because I'm getting your sound waves and they're kind of small. So we want some big sound waves from Tromondae.
Got you.
What are we talking about today, Tromondae?
Today we are talking about a comparison that we did on 2 sitcoms, one being Roseanne and the other being the Cosbys.
Now, here's a really cool thing about doing a podcast with Tromondae as opposed to doing a podcast with Doc in the flesh. Doc doesn't research anything. He self-proclaims that he does not research anything, and that's okay because that means that Doc is like the audience hearing something for the first time. However, Tromondae does research stuff. Is that right, Tromondae?
It is.
Okay, good. Paper Doc, however, what do you do, Paper Doc? God damn it, I just look good. Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess. I mean, you're rather two-dimensional, I guess.
Yeah,
But
very.
whatever. That's fine. So, it's let me just ask some baseline questions. If the audience doesn't know, I'd be surprised if the audience doesn't know what we're talking about with the sitcom Roseanne. If you don't know what the sitcom is, we'll kind of describe it. The same thing with the Cosby Show. If you don't know what the Cosby Show is, it depends kind of, I guess, on how old you are. But even recent pop culture, I think a lot of people know what those 2 characters are, or they've heard of the sitcoms. I myself am 46 years old, so of course I remember both of them. Tremondae's quite a bit younger than I am.
Yes. But I do remember...
Joey's like, yes, I am.
I am. But I do remember watching some of them, when I was younger. I think what's kind of sad now is that younger generations, they know of those sitcoms, but it's because of like negative reasons.
Because
That's
of negative
why
reasons?
It's
Right.
been brought to the
Sure.
forefront, but...
Well, I think it's also, even though there's a big difference in age between us, which is, how much older am I than you?
I'm 34.
Yeah, so I am 12 years older than you.
Okay.
So you're the age of
was thinking
my
about 10.
age of my little brother. So it wouldn't be unusual for us both to have seen the shows because they both aired for actually a really long time.
Right.
So they were both on the air for a long time. So what I'll do is I'm going to read you guys the Amazon Prime description of the Cosby Show.
Good.
Okay. So Bill Cosby plays Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable, who, along with his wife Claire, an attorney, struggles to balance the challenges of their successful careers with the demands of their 5 children. And that show debuted in 1984 on NBC, and its final airing was in April of 1992. The Roseanne description is the story of a working-class family struggling with life's essential problems, marriage, children, money, and parents-in-law. And that debuted 4 years later in 1988 on ABC. And the final airing of that was 1987 with some recent attempts in 2018 to kind of revamp the show, or bring it back, rather. So, which one do you want to talk about first? What do you want to talk about first?
Let's talk about Roseanne.
Let's talk about Roseanne. Okay, so Roseanne, as most people probably know, Roseanne was originally not Roseanne Barr. I can't even remember her original name. And then she was Roseanne, she was originally Roseanne Barr, and then she was Roseanne Arnold, and then she's just Roseanne now. So she went through some, marriage or name changes like Cher and Madonna. Mm-hmm. Now, what do I like about Roseanne's show? Well, let me give you guys a little bit of background, my listeners, or my first-time listeners who don't know. I am, although I probably sound like it because I'm from the Midwest and we notoriously have no accent, I am not white. I am not white to the point of being blue. I am more of a mocha color. I mean, on a good day, if I get enough sun. Otherwise, I'm kind of a sickly yellow-looking color. But that's because my mom is from Mexico and my dad is some sort of a European mutt, whatever generation. I think he's like Irish, German, French. Probably some Welsh thrown in there. So he's so white that he's blue, as I've said before. If you can imagine what the veins look like on an old lady's legs, that's kind of my dad's tone. So I was raised in a white household, so not really what I say was I raised in a Hispanic household. That's the background. You yourself, Tromondae, what would you say your background is?
I am African American. Both of my parents are African American from Michigan, the U.S., and that's how I identify.
And so they're black.
Yes.
Okay. You never know. You could be South African American, and they tend to be white, so, and speak with an Australian accent, but who knows? So, do you think you were raised in a traditionally black
yes.
household? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I would say I was raised in a traditionally white household. Mm-hmm. We did a lot of things culturally, but mostly it was white. Not that that's a bad thing, people, but I also kind of grew up in the back of my mind that I should be privileged, but I'm not because I'm still brown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which you'll see when I get pulled over by a cop. When my white friends can tell the top cop to go fuck off, and I still have to be polite, and I'll still get a fucking ticket. And I'll start to be an asshole, and I'm like, oh wait a minute, I forgot, I'm not white. I can't
do that.
So I can't do that. I have to shut up and put my hands on top of the wheels. Yeah, and if Doc listens to this, he's like, that's not true. Oh wait, let's get Paper Doc's out. I as well am like your father, Beaveman. I'm so white that I'm basically blue. Okay, well, and I wouldn't say that I'm privileged in any shape or form. I mean, when I get pulled over by the cops, well, I do give them a good strict talking to, and I say, hey, mister, well, what's the big deal? Pull me over like this. Don't you know I was just listening to my honky-tonk music? A little too loud, maybe. Okay. So we were both raised in what we would consider culturally our background type of housing or homeland. What strikes you about Roseanne? Just go base it off of your experience watching it. What did you think? How do you see the roles and characters in that show?
I found the characters to be very honest, if you will. I found that the rate in what they spoke and the word choice that they used to have in the script and how they acted, it seemed to be represent like a very honest household, that it wasn't sent through this filter, which is what I thought was kind of like drastically different than watching the Cosbys. The show was absolutely hilarious. We both watched the pilot episodes of each show, and I laughed nonstop throughout Roseanne.
Yeah, me too. I think that the thing about Roseanne, and I don't think I'm biased at all when I say this, is you could watch Roseanne now. Mm-hmm. You could watch it from start to finish. As a matter of fact, after we said we were going to watch those two shows, I watched Roseanne, and I'm on season 6. So I started watching all of them. I'm like, because it still stands up. I'm like, and the reason why it stands up, and you're probably too young to remember this, but I can remember this from being real little. The shows that were on before like Roseanne came on were shows that were so ridiculous that the common people, and that's what I am, middle class or low middle class, working class people, would watch shows like Dynasty and Dallas. And these were shows about uberly rich people doing insane, stupid things with lots of money. And it was like people wanted to escape by sitting on their couch and watching this shit. But that's the type of shows that we're on, and they're completely unrealistic. You can't relate to any of it. It's all bullshit.
Yes.
It was what they did was they took soap operas and they put them on at night. Is really what they did. That's literally what they did. They took these unbelievable characters with unbelievable loads of money, beautiful people, whatever, and put them on at night and said, "Hey, watch this," and that's what people did. Then when Roseanne came along, that was relatable. That's what I call real TV. That's where I felt that writers really wrote. And they're like, oh, my mom would do this. This is something my mom would do.
Absolutely. It felt like it was, as you said, it was more for the common type people. But then as well as watching the Cosbys, there are people who grew up with parents who were, doctors and of wealth. And I wonder if they see that as more common. But for me, the Cosbys almost seem unrealistic just because it was not, in a part of my upbringing.
The pilot's really interesting on the Cosby Show. So flipping back to the Cosbys, because we're kind of comparing them, we're talking about giving some background. The Cosby Show, to give everybody, if you've never seen the Cosby Show, of course it's got Bill Cosby. He's the dad, and he's a doctor. He's like an obstetrician, so he delivers babies.
Yes.
So he's a doctor. He's got his wife, Claire, and she's a lawyer. So now you've got a doctor and a lawyer, and they live in Brooklyn or Manhattan or something, something like that. So they're doing pretty well. And then they've got 4 children in the pilot, but they actually have 5 children in the show. And so they've got a lot of money. And I wonder here's what I wonder about that show from watching it, because I really liked that show. I thought it was funny. It's a good show.
It is.
But do you think that they were playing to a white audience? Because that's so. I know that the part of the premise of that show is that it was supposed to break these racial barriers or something.
Right.
But to me, it's like, okay, not saying that black people don't have that type of family dynamic, but it felt like to me, like, aren't you playing kind of to the white audience? That's what it felt like to me.
I honestly felt the same way. Just with how they parent was very different than what I've seen of many parents being African American or black. And it just didn't seem, as I said, realistic in my opinion.
Now, I'm going to throw out that thing that I hate it when people do it. But I'm going to do it anyway. Throughout my life, I've had a lot of black friends. And I often tell people this, when they're all stupid and stuff. I'm like, when I was in the Army, for example, I had probably half and half. Half my friends were white and half my friends were black. I didn't know that many Hispanic people when I was in the Army, which was weird. I mean, there always seemed to be a Puerto Rican in one of the companies I was in, and we always notoriously hated each other because that's a Mexican Puerto Rican thing. It was just all fake. It was mock and stuff, but it was one of those things that Puerto Ricans and Mexicans aren't supposed to like each other, I guess. Whatever. Half my friends were black and half my friends were white, pretty classically everywhere I went. Being around them and knowing what their upbringing was like, and there was a lot of different types of sitcoms on. I think that's when the CW started to get big and stuff when I was in the Army. So we would watch shows like I would watch Martin and stuff like that.
Yes.
And they would say, dude, that's more realistic than like the Cosby Show. Even though the Cosby Show is funny and they, people still like it.
Yes.
They're like, that's not as realistic according to them. But again, most of the time, the people I was in the military with either were like me, kind of lower middle class or poor working class or whatever. So who knows what that higher, I mean, if you're a doctor and a lawyer and you live in Brooklyn or Manhattan or something like that, that's probably a lot of money.
Right.
So I don't know which audience they were really playing to. That's what I
Yeah.
kind of think about now when I watch it. I'm like,
Yeah. But then, I guess too that they were wanting to show that all African Americans or black people are not ghetto and loud and, which I can absolutely respect, But I did notice there's a episode of the Cosbys. It's called Call to the Wild. It is one of my favorite episodes. And I think this came much later in the season because the children were grown, and I think one of the children were off to college or something like that. But
doing a different world.
Yeah,
So Denise takes off,
and it was funny because like they were speaking very eloquent, like very educated, and then like the child says something, and Claire, she like switched gears, and like she sounded more of like what you would think a typical black mom would sound like when she's upset with her kid. And I was just like, it was like interesting like to see the difference in tones in such a short amount of time, all within one episode, all within one scene. And so it's like, I wonder if later in the season they started to pull away from that. But I know in the beginning it was very heavy, where it did seem like they were trying to target, a different audience. But then I'm thinking, why are you trying to target? What would be the reason for targeting a audience of a different race?
Ratings. I mean, who watches that? So if they were on,
True.
Okay, so we had 4 networks basically back in the day. We had NBC, ABC, and CBS. Most people don't even know that. That's how old I am. Okay, and then eventually, we got Fox. Okay, that took forever before Fox came along. We only had the 3. And then Fox came along and they made fun of Fox forever, and they still do. But Fox produced all the really good TV shows. And then, of course, you have all the other billion TV shows now. So who watches TV? Young, middle-aged men and women that are white. That's where that's the majority of the audience. And then you go on later on and they develop, they have their own TV networks, where they come up with, like the Fox and the CW and all those other things. And it seems like all those shows kind of migrate over to those areas. And that's more targeted to your, I don't know, they target the demographic then, I guess. I don't know, because I don't watch regular TV anymore. I have no idea what's on regular TV anymore.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you.
I could not, no, absolutely not. So that's what I think. Even if you look at the characters, right? So the characters, Dr. Huxtable, in that first episode, it's kind of funny because this guy comes over to date his daughter, right? And he's all appalled because the guy's got an earring. And I'm like, what's so crazy about having an earring? So so that would have been 84. What was so weird about having an earring in 84?
Right.
There was nothing weird about having an earring in 84. So I thought that was a little bit bizarre, as if he's like, she can't date him, he's got an earring. Plus he was a merchant marine and spent a year in a Turkish prison or whatever. But I mean, that was a good twist. But otherwise, I'm like, I don't see the problem with having an earring. And then she comes out. I remember she comes out and wears this. She's wearing like a typical 80s outfit. And he's freaking out about this. She wasn't showing anything. She wasn't. Right. There was no leg. She wasn't showing her chest. Nothing like that. And he's freaking out about that. And I'm like, well, how realistic is that? Either. I'm like, I didn't understand the whole concept behind that. Did you think any of that was a little bit odd?
I honestly didn't pay too much attention to it until you just brought it up. I didn't notice those pieces in the episode.
I think it was a character development thing. I think they were trying to show that Lisa Bonet's character, who's the second oldest daughter, what was her name? What was her name? That's Denise, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was Denise. So the second oldest daughter, they're trying to show her as like some sort of a hip black sheep or something like that. Like she's the one who's the trendy one. She's the one.
Yes.
Because she's the one who goes off later in the spinoff into a different world or whatever, and we see that she's some sort of kind of beatnik type person.
Yep.
I think that's all they were trying to do. I think they were trying to establish the characters later on. Now, what I thought was really interesting too about the Cosby Show was he did a lot of his stand-up in that first episode. Or I don't know if you call it stand-up, because once upon a time, I mean, they didn't have like comedy clubs, so they did a lot of stuff in theaters. But a lot of that first episode is from his tape, Bill Cosby himself, which I was like, oh, I know all that stuff because I have that tape and I used to listen to it all the time.
Yeah. So was he a writer for the show as well?
I imagine. I don't know. I didn't look at the writing credits.
Okay.
I assume so. I assume he was heavily, I imagine he produced it. I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm wrong all the time. It's very possible. But going back to Roseanne, why is that realistic? So here's the little thing that I also thought was a little bit different. Okay, so who's the dominant character in Roseanne? Roseanne. Okay, so if you look at what type of social situation or what type of family structure that is, what would you say? It's like a matriarchal society or matriarchal family, where the mom is the head of the family and everything kind of flows around her, probably obviously because she's the star, but still. In the Cosby Show, I don't know what type of, how they were setting that up. I don't know who was really the head of the family in the Cosby Show. Because it kind of made it seem like he kowtowed to his wife a lot. Like she was the dominant character and he was like the funny kind of bumbling character. So, but I'm not sure if that's really what the family structure was, how they were trying to establish it.
I didn't even think about that.
Well, what did you think about it? That's a good fine point there, Beaveman. We really want to know, what is Tromondae's take on this from a societal perspective, if we're speaking from a sociological and or psychological aspect? Well, there's some big words, Paper Doc. Have you been learning a lot in school, haven't you? Well, I guess I have, and thanks for asking.
You know, going back to what was said earlier on in our taping, you know, I really think that they were trying to show that there are successful black people, and just really trying to build up that this is an ideal image of the family, to show that mom and dad both do well, mom and dad are both equal, that mom is not a stay-at-home mom and she's not cooking and cleaning and having things ready for dad when he gets home, that they work as a team, which in some episodes throughout the running of the show, there were moments when Claire made it very clear that she was on Cliff's team and vice versa, that she didn't do things just because she was a woman, and that he didn't do things just because he was the man. So I think that they were both trying to establish that they're both are equal. Whereas Roseanne, I feel like one dominated a little bit more than the other, even though she was working at, I think, a restaurant as a server, and he was working in like
construction
yes,
most of the time, yeah.
You know, so, and then if you look at that case, like, who do you think was bringing home more money? Think
shit, hard to say.
you know,
shit.
But
in those years, it was hard to say.
You know, but you would think like, okay, maybe the construction worker is bringing home a little bit more, but yet she still, you know, kind of ran the house, ran the children. Like anything that, like in that first episode, anything that had to happen, it went through her.
Right, and everything that happens in Roseanne goes through Roseanne.
Yep.
Roseanne is the head of the family, but she still and I don't know if they did this intentionally or if it was just part of the writing dynamic, but if you notice in Roseanne, Dan doesn't do any housework. Mm-mm. He doesn't do shit. He sits down at the dinner table, reads the paper while he asks when is dinner going to be ready, when is this, when is that. Occasionally he'll dry a dish or something like that.
Yes.
He does nothing.
Yes.
He does nothing other than work. He doesn't really, he might, he kind of plays with the kids and all that sort of, he has a relationship with the children, but he doesn't do anything.
I agree.
She does everything.
Yes.
Or has the children help her, whatever. So to me that seems odd that she's the head of the family, clearly. She's the discipliner, she's everything, but yet she doesn't dictate other than emotionally to him what he should do, which is very typical of that generation anyway. So they're supposed to be kids from the 60s, which means their parents would have been 50s, 40s, and that would have still had that role where mom makes the dinner has to be on the table, dishes have to be done, children have to be clean, children should shut up, that sort of thing. That was one of the goofy things. I'm like, even watching that now, I'm like, man, Dan doesn't do shit.
Yeah.
He doesn't do anything.
Yeah, and it was very clear in that pilot episode, because I think there was a part when the daughter was like asking about like a backpack, and she was asking for help because she had work, and she's just like, well, damn, I guess I'll go off and I'll do that one thing too, because he just could not manage to pick up one thing to do for his family outside of working.
Right. He's like, I work all day. Yeah, okay. Well, we understand that you work all day. But then if I look at ours also, so if I look at my family growing up, that's how our family was too. Except it wasn't funny. there was nothing fucking funny in our family. In our family, it was the same way. My mom, she worked all day, but she cleaned and she cooked dinner, and my dad didn't do shit. He did lawn, lawn work and stuff like that, but he did nothing. My dad's never hung up a pair of pants that I know of. He's never done anything. And even now, he gets yelled at when he comes over to our house because he'll like shake his glass and stuff like that. I'm like, no, that ain't fucking, dude, that ain't fucking happening. I'm like, you get your fucking ass up and
rings a bell.
Right. So when you look at that sort of thing, you're like, okay, I can see where maybe they were trying to stick with some traditional roles so people could see those roles. But even then, sometimes they'll make references to like leave it to Beaver and like, hey Ward, or my, you look beautiful today, Mrs. Connor, et cetera, et cetera. So they didn't really break down too many walls other than showing a middle class family and what it's like to not be rich and not to have everything. They're always struggling with money, which is a very real American issue.
Yes.
Whereas the Huxtables, you never hear them struggling talking about money.
No, not at all.
They're more concerned about whether their kids are going to go to college, that sort of thing.
Yes.
So, the other question I had was, do you think that either one of those shows break or maintain stereotypes?
Break.
Here's some hard-hitting questions from the Beaveman today, Beavemanites and Docutrons, in case you hadn't noticed. But I have to ask these questions because I have a different guest.
Break or maintain stereotypes? I think for the Cosbys, I think it did break some stereotypes, and I think part of that, as I said earlier, was just to prove that not all blacks have this ghetto image or mentality, that they are educated and can speak well and can raise a family and can send their children off to college. Like, it's something that they were thinking about prior to. It's still interesting that I connected a little bit more with Roseanne. And I think it's just because it is more of what I saw. It's more of what I heard coming from a, middle class family where, my dad was the provider and my mom was, for the most part, a stay-at-home mom. And so, like, I connected with that a little more. I connected with the humor, honestly, a little bit more as well. Just because it seemed more of like what I've seen, and it's more of what I've heard. So it sounded more familiar to me. Whereas the Cosbys, I got moments of that. Like I said, when she switched her tone, but it wasn't consistent like it was for me in Roseanne.
Mm-hmm. And what about comparing the characters, though? So if you're the writer, or if you're the show developer, or the whatever they call them, when they look at the different characters and they say, okay, I want somebody who's like this, I want the dad to be like this, now I've got to have so many children, and I want this child to fill the character of, this one's going to be the funny one, this one's going to be the cute one, this one's going to be the obnoxious one, or whatever. Mm-hmm. How did they do that in comparison to the two? Even though, the Cosbys have 4/5 children, mm-hmm. and the Connors have 3, but I think later on they end up having a baby, but that baby doesn't talk or anything. But they have the 3 from the beginning. So if you look at Roseanne, so Roseanne, she's the obnoxious matriarch. Mm-hmm. You've got Dan, who's the bumbling, charming, gets easily rattled by crap that's stuff like a period from a girl, as the dad. And then you've got the first daughter, and she's supposed to be the responsible one, the smart one, mm-hmm. the one who's not funny, who has all the responsibilities with the other children, that sort of thing. Yeah. And then you've got the middle daughter, who's the dark, brooding, sarcastic one, yep. who's admittedly, I think she's my favorite character. And then you've got DJ. Who's known for great timing mm-hmm. and everything. He always pops in with like one-liner. And then, of course, I think you really have to count the aunt because she's like in every freaking episode. Yes. And she's there, and she's the neurotic failure, basically, that her sister has to take care of all the time. Well, technically doesn't have to take care of, but does anyway because she's nosy. Yep. and domineering as part of her role. The Cosbys is a little bit different in that respect. There's nobody who's like dark and brooding in the Cosbys. They have their problems are, I don't know what their problems are. Their problems don't seem to be monumental in comparison. The first episode's very good. Mm-hmm. And I kind of like how in the first episode, just to give the rundown, they've got the son, his name is Theo, and brings home like a crappy report card. So mm-hmm. he's got a crappy report card. That's not something that 2 successful parents really want to look at. They don't want to see a bad report card because they want their kid to go to college and be just like them. Right. And he has this whole interaction with Dr. Huxtable, and he talks how he wants to be a regular person, and why can't his dad just accept him and love him for being a regular person. Has a nice little speech, and at the end of the speech, his father says, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're going to go to college, and you're going to do good grades mm-hmm. or whatever. So I thought they did a really good job of saying, hey, I just want to be a regular person. There's nothing wrong with being a regular person. And his dad says, that's fucking stupid, and you need to be something else. Mm-hmm. So I think what they were trying to do there is they were trying to set him up as somebody who's going to struggle throughout the series with grades, and maybe he'll be funny, but he might be a little bit of a
keeping his room clean, typical
boy.
Yep.
Yes. So they've got the role for the oldest one, Well, she's not the oldest one. That just drives me crazy. Forever, I didn't know who the oldest daughter was.
Yeah, was she in the earlier season of the show?
She wasn't in the pilot, and in the pilot, even I watched the pilot again recently, and even in the pilot, he comes home, and his wife says to him, "Why did we have 4 children?" And he says, "Because we didn't want 5." But they have 5. Mm-hmm. They have the older daughter, and the older daughter is Sandra.
Yes. Yep.
And you don't see her till later in the season, and then now does she move in with them? Is that what happens later on when she? Isn't that what happens? They have that other main character that's like the son-in-law that is on the other later episodes or something like that. I don't know. So yeah, you don't even see her till later.
Yeah.
So we don't even know what her role is at all. She's just not there. Mm-hmm. And then we've got Theo, and then we've got the other 2 who are young at the time. So Vanessa, and she's kind of obnoxious. She's smart, but she's kind of obnoxious.
Yeah. She gets into some trouble like later in the show. I remember like one episode of like they were teaching her a lesson about drinking and things like that.
They're like, you don't have to extend your pinky when you drink. They're like, let me talk to you about drinking and driving, son. And they sit down and you're like, that shit is fun. Oh, that was from, what was that from? Don't get caught drinking your gin and juice in the hood. It was a Wayans movie.
Yeah. Is that Don't Be a Menace?
Yeah, Don't Be a Menace to Society while drinking your gin. Yep. Yeah, something like that. Okay. Yeah, that was a good one. Man, that shit is fun. Yeah, and then you've got Rudy, who's the youngest, and her sole purpose is just to be cute.
Be cute.
That's it. That's her purpose. That's it. Don't they add more? Don't they add like even more like children? Like, isn't there like one younger than Rudy eventually? Who's like, I don't think that she must be one of the other kids' kids or something like that.
Yes.
Isn't that the girl who played Raven?
Olivia.
Yeah.
And she's the daughter of not Vanessa, not Sandra. What's the other?
Denise.
So Denise gets married to the guy who was serving, and he has a daughter. Oh. And so then that's how Olivia gets brought into the
See, this show ran for like, what, 9 years?
Yeah, it did.
It ran from, let's see, 88 to 97. Yeah, that's a long free time.
But you know, like now thinking about that, I feel like from the beginning as the show, or I should say as the season progressed, it seemed like they started to get away from that picture perfect family. You know, because like I said, they did the lesson with teaching Vanessa about not drinking. And so here they are with Rudy and the parents, and they're playing this chug game, and Rudy takes a drink, and you know, Vanessa's like you guys are gonna let her drink, and then finally Vanessa has to take a shot. She realizes it's apple juice, and that the family was just playing a trick on her, but they were trying to teach her a lesson. I feel like that wouldn't have happened earlier in the season, or allowing one of their kids to, you know, get married and, you know, bring in another kid that's not their own. You're like, I feel like some of those things wouldn't have lined up with the perfect picture image that they were creating in the beginning.
Well, and then the audience changes.
Yes.
So you're like, maybe people are looking at it and going, you know what, this is not realistic. This is, you know, this is kind of garbage or whatever. And you have to change if you're going to stay on.
True.
So
true.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And it kind of really, I wish I would have started watching the Cosby Show again to kind of see, to refresh my, I'm kind of mostly going off my memory and stuff. But the thing is, I thought about watching the Cosby Show, but all I could think about was, you know, Bill Cosby sticking a pudding pop up somebody. So I was like, well, I don't know if I can watch this without thinking about him molesting somebody with a pudding pop. You have to remember, I grew up with Bill Cosby, so you know, Fat Albert, and then when I was in middle school, I have like 2 of his tapes, so that I used to listen to all the time, because you used to be able to you'll get this thing from RCA Records or whatever, and they'd say, oh, if you give us a penny, you get 12 tapes, and next thing you know, you get the 12 tapes, but then they send you 4 more, and next thing you know, you owe them $40, and you're like, fuck. Well, my first initial 12 though had like one of Bill Cosby's tapes, and then later on I got another one. So I listened to him over and over again. I could probably still quote a lot of it from that Bill. That's how I knew that first one has a bunch of the lines from his tape. And I'm sure I have those tapes upstairs. Unfortunately, I can't play them on anything because I don't have a tape player anymore. But they still sell them on Amazon if you want to buy one. I actually might buy one. Yeah.
So if we talk about that for a moment. So I am not familiar with Fat Albert. Only connection I know is like probably like around my high school days. I think connected with FUBU, and so then they start putting Fat Albert on clothes. But that's all I knew, was just wearing it on the back of a blue jean jacket. Is the comedy, or is the voice of Bill Cosby the same in Fat Albert as it was on the Cosby Show?
Only when on the show Fat Albert, he would talk to the audience. Mm-hmm. And then they would roll the cartoon, and then like if the boys had some problem, like he would break in and be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. That's the only time his voice was the same. Everywhere else, he was doing Fat Albert's voice, or, I'm sure I can remember the characters' names. There's one he wore this like hat where it was just his eyes showed, and he would do his voice. And Fat Albert was like the best cartoon. Yeah. It was freaking awesome. But even now, I'm like, God, was he sticking a pudding pop in those guys, or I don't know.
Is the context the same though?
You mean like
the humor, like the storylines, like was it?
Okay, well, first of all, this is the weird thing, and I don't think I think a lot of people do know this that are my age or older. There was always this thing, is Bill Cosby, which is so contrary to what he was accused of and convicted for.
Right.
He was not a dirty comic. Okay. And he was not foul-mouthed. And Eddie Murphy does a skit where he actually talks about how Bill Cosby, like called him and said, hey, you need to tone it down. It's disrespectful or whatever.
Really?
And then he does another thing where he says, and Richard Pryor called him on the phone. He's like, tell Bill to kiss my ass. He's like, you do whatever the fuck you want. So, but that's I don't remember which one of Eddie Murphy's, it's freaking hilarious. But Bill Cosby's always was always wholesome. He was just so freaking wholesome. Okay. And Fat Albert, they never did anything that was bad at all. Okay. I mean, they get into these goofy situations, and they'd have to try to figure it out. And I mean, it was a great show, and it was and I think everybody probably my age who actually watched it felt like it was a good, you could probably rank it with learning life lessons, almost like Sesame Street.
Really? So,
but it was entertaining, and it was for, you're a little bit older. Right. So that was one of my favorite shows. And still, I mean, I'd like it now if I didn't have to think about the pudding pop thing. And I keep coming back to the pudding pop. And the reason why is because Bill used to always advertise pudding pops. Yeah. But now all I can think of him is just raping someone with a pudding pop. Yeah. Please tell me you didn't do that, Bill. Anyway, he's like 90 now. He'll die in jail, whatever. So, no, Fat Albert. But, no, Fat Albert, it was different from The Cosby Show. The Cosby Show was supposed to be a comedy, right? Mm-hmm. But I think it was more brief little blips of comedy mixed in with trying to show sappy life lessons, but they weren't really life lessons because none of them were major emergencies, like in Roseanne, where they never fucking had any money. They were worried about getting groceries. There's lots of times in Roseanne where the bill collectors are calling, and she's like, oh, I didn't send you that check, or they'd call her and she's like, what? I forgot to sign that check? Yes. Just to get her more time. Yes. There's a really good episode of Roseanne where they get a letter at the house, and it's from the middle school or wherever Darlene goes. Darlene's the brooding daughter. And it's asking Dan to come down for career day. And Roseanne's like, well, fuck that. Why didn't they ask me to come down for career day just because he's the man? Yeah. And she makes a lot of references to the 60s about how they've had, equality marches and all that other stuff. And so she goes to the school and talks to the home ec class, and then she takes them on a field trip to show them how to make a meal under a budget for a family of, 5. And that was so cool because you're like, okay, so there's this scene where she says, okay, you've got to get the cereal to go on, or whatever. So Darlene goes to grab the cereal, and she's like, no. And it was like some kind of like a Lucky Charms type thing. Right. She goes to grab the cereal, and she's like, no, Darlene, it's this one. And she's like, I have these every morning, and I have for every year. And she's like, no, dear, what you have is the box. I've been putting the other cereal in that box for years. Ah. Yeah, so all that stuff, you're like, well, that's pretty funny because you could see somebody doing that to have that facade, or that, that not necessarily did their children know that they... Right. They had no fantasies in their head that their family had money. Right. But at least they were kind of showing them a little bit, okay, well, here's this, thing that I've been doing to protect you just a little bit, even though she's supposed to be this mom that is so horrible. But that's just a little thing that she was doing. But again, that appeals to people's sense that, I mean, I knew lots of people that had to get government cheese or milk from the, and by the way, government cheese makes the best enchiladas, in case anybody wants to know. At least it did. I don't know what it's made out of now. Back in the day, though, government cheese, awesome enchiladas. So that's why that show is more realistic to me. Let me see. What was my other question for you? I think that was most of my questions. What are your questions? What did you think? What was the big things that struck out in your mind? What would you like to ask a white Hispanic in regards to that?
We've honestly kind of just covered most of my questions through conversation. And the biggest for me was, does it look like it fits into the culture through our eyes being black? And I don't know how you want me to define you.
Off-white? I don't know.
What do you say, Doc?
Yeah, I'm gonna say that he's not white. He is gonna be Hispanic because that is what the government says he is. We actually had this discussion, the real Doc and I did, on the last podcast. So go ahead and listen to the last podcast, because Doc and I actually get into this big argument about it. Because on government forms, and I wish I had a government form in front of me now, or when you ask for your demographic and the stuff that you have to answer or whatever, it always says, what is your, what do you identify as? It says white, and it'll say Hispanic, and then it'll say black, and then it says like Asian Pacific Islander or whatever. And you can't say white if you're Hispanic, because it says right there in parentheses, you can't be both. You can't identify as, even though that's what Hispanic is, I mean, technically, or, Chicano. I wish they would say Chicano. I wish there was a block that said that, because that's technically what I am, right? I'm half white, I'm half Mexican. But no, you can't say both. So what they should probably say is, what do you identify as, and what is your ethnicity? Or something, or they should probably just eliminate it all and say, were you born in this country or not? But then that makes people mad too. So the argument we had was that Doc said that he's like, well, I could just click Native American because I was born in America. And I said, so this is the argument we had. I said, well, technically, you are a native of America, but because the definition for Native American means tribal or indigenous to the United States, you cannot, you could put it, what are they going to do? What are they going to do to you? But that's not what it means. That's when you look at the classification of me, of course, I always mark Hispanic. Because I'm not going to mark white. I'm always going to mark Hispanic. But does that filter down to my children? Are my children going to mark Hispanic? Because as time goes by, obviously, one more generation, if my children don't marry someone who's Mexican, that's gone with their children.
Yes.
So, that's it. But then technically, they'll be American. True American, I guess. Unless you're like one of those white supremacist people who would believe that that's not the case. Living off the merits of your ancestors that came here 2, 3, 4 generations ago, and you believe this is only your country. Anyway, I won't delve into that at all. So here's an interesting thing about Roseanne, and I don't know if I'm sure it's true of the Cosby Show, because I can remember Louis Armstrong being on the Cosby Show. So the Cosbys, and back then at least, we all know that Bill Cosby was a big jazz fan. So there was a lot of jazz stars that would pop up on there. And I can always remember Louis Armstrong being on there. And I can also remember that there was a spoof of the Cosbys once, and I think it was on, I can't remember if it was on The Simpsons, but they were like, I think it was The Simpsons, and they were watching TV, and it was the Cosbys. And he went and opened the door, and there was like a jazz musician there. And he's like, hey, here's your grandpa so-and-so. And the Cosby kids are like, how many grandfathers do we have? Because it was another jazz musician. Yeah. Which was true. You're like, yeah, how many jazz musicians are their grandparents or their uncles or whatever? Because they all just come rattling in. But on Roseanne, it was kind of funny, because when you watch Roseanne or any Amazon show, if you watch it like on your iPad or your iPhone, it has trivia on the side, or you touch the side and it will show the characters that are in that scene. And then you can click on the character and it'll tell you who they are. Well, this is all stuff you don't think about when you're a kid watching it. But when I'm watching it now, I always hit that. So if there's somebody different in the scene that's not the regular characters, I'll hit it and see who it is. You wouldn't believe how many people were on that show that are either famous now or were famous like in the 60s or something like that, who were like, like I was watching it, and that meatloaf scene, or the scene where Roseanne was taking the kids to the grocery store to teach them how to make for a family of 5 or whatever. Mm-hmm. Well, prior to that, she's talking to the home ec class. And so I'm like, okay, well, there's a bunch of kids there. Who are those kids that are in there? So I hit the side, and one of the kids that was in that class, and you can't see him in the scene, you don't see him in there, was Leonardo DiCaprio. But you can't see him. And I mean, you look at the scene, he pops up as being in that scene, but he's got to be standing behind people. I'm like just in the background.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. And then there was one time they were in the diner, and this is the diner that she worked at, like at Rod Bell's. And some kids came in and sat down, and I can't remember, one of them like must have liked the daughter or whatever, and he was with 2 friends, and the one friend had one line, and I hit the side. I'm like, oh, I know who that is. And it was Tobey Maguire, the Spider-Man. He was in there. So all through it, there's like rock stars and things like that, all kinds of stuff all the way through it, which is kind of funny.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I didn't. Obviously, I don't realize as a kid, but as adult, probably adults watching it were like, "Oh, that's so and so." And I think one of the guys, one scene was like he was sitting there and he had like this really minor part. And it was like the lead singer from it was like Johnny Rotten from like one of those British rock bands, and some of the from the '60s bands were in there, like playing and stuff. So it's really kind of cool to see all these minor parts that people just stepped in and played.
Yeah.
The one episode I watched yesterday. The other day, it had Red Buttons on it, and most people don't know who that is. But Red Button, my grandma loved Red Buttons. He was a comedian back a long time ago. Very filthy kind of comedian, very funny. But he's on their show, and so it was kind of cool. So you can see as time goes by, I guess as Roseanne got more and more. Well, she was a stand-up comic. Yeah. So probably she started just getting the people she knew filtering into the show, which kind of, either you knew them or you didn't. Either way, it was fun to watch. Right. Kind of like how the Cosbys kind of. They sort of did that with every jazz star known to man.
Yeah. I would love to go back and look at what was being said on the news about blacks at that time. Because I know earlier I said that the Cosby wanted to show blacks in a different light. Love to see what was posted on the news, because I think about shows like Family Matters, another family doing very well. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, another show.
Great show. Not realistic, but I don't think we're great. Well, maybe it was realistic now, but
where family is still doing very well. So I'm looking at if all those shows are just produced just to show that there are successful black families. Well,
what's a good show though? So what's a good show that would actually show a family that's kind of struggling a little bit? No, it's black. So Rock.
I remember Rock a little bit. I didn't really.
I just remember he was a garbage man. Yeah, they didn't seem to ever be doing bad though. No, I don't remember a lot of stuff about them complaining about money but it did seem like a pretty middle class type family type thing.
It does, and I think that show was a little too mature when I was in that area. But I think about a show called Good Times, which I don't know if you heard of Good Times.
Oh yeah,
which is even before me, but that was just family just straight struggling in the projects, and
that came out in the 70s, late 60s, that was 70s. Yeah, that's Jimmy Walker.
Yes, right? Yeah. And so I wonder I would love to see how many shows came between Good Times and the Cosbys.
Okay, so going back to culturally speaking, and which the most realistic? Okay, the most realistic. So here's what I say. I don't watch network television now, so I don't know what the realism is anymore with network television. But the most realistic television shows I can remember, probably, I don't know that they probably wouldn't make it on network television today. They would have to be on cable. But the two shows that I identified the most with, or the 3 shows rather, one would be Roseanne. Even though my mom wasn't like that. Well, she's kind of like that. I mean, a little bit, but and then the All in the Family. If you ever saw All in the Family, completely asshole racist dad, but freaking hilarious, and how families really were. Here's his wife, neurotic, always getting him coffee, sits next to all this other stuff, and then the complete opposite spectrum of that is Sanford and Son. Now, if you've never seen Sanford and Son, you need to YouTube it, Google it, whatever.
Yep.
Sanford and Son, hands down, probably the fucking funniest show that I ever saw on TV.
Yeah.
And if you watch it, I've seen some clips now, within a year, I still laugh my ass off. And I don't know how closely that relates to. Obviously, they didn't just make that up. I mean, they wrote it.
Right.
But he had so many different ethnicities on that show. Mm-hmm. Like the Mexican guy was stereotypical. I don't know if he's Mexican or Puerto Rican, but and Mr. Sanford just made a racial slur about every single person he came. Didn't matter if they were Italian, Puerto Rican, whatever, and it was freaking hilarious. But it would never. You couldn't put it on network TV now. Mm-hmm. I don't even know how I got it. I don't know how either one of those shows, All in the Family or Sanford and Son, were able to be on TV. It's just crazy.
Huh.
Oh, yeah, and you want to talk about then there's the other spectrum, right? So on All in the Family, the Jeffersons lived next to the Bunkers originally until he made it big in the dry cleaning industry or whatever.
Yep.
And then he moved up, and moving on.
Yep.
And that show did really well.
It did.
But I don't feel like that's a pretty good example, though, of not completely pandering to a white audience. But I don't, and that show did really well. So I don't know how long it was on, but I can remember it pretty vivid. I mean, we used to watch it all the time.
Yeah. For a moment, I thought you were going to say Married with Children was.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate too. That's a pretty good show.
Yeah. I don't know. Are there really moms like that?
Yeah, there are, because I can remember being a kid. So a lot of the kids, when I was growing up, their moms didn't work. Most of the kids I knew, their moms didn't work. They were just at home, cleaning the house and trying to look pretty or whatever.
Push up bras
and went for when Dad came home. Yep. I had a friend like that whose mom was like that. Yep.
Would you go over their house a lot?
I was over there fairly often. She didn't have a big chest, but she was attractive, and she tried to look attractive. I mean, she looked attractive for the dad when he got home. Yeah, house was nice and clean, and she didn't look dumpy. Actually, really, when I think about it, my mom was probably one of the only moms I knew that did work.
Really,
pretty frequently. Yeah, daily. And my mom was not about to try to look hot for my dad, so thankfully, I didn't have to deal with that.
Yeah, but the mom on that show, she wasn't portrayed in a very intelligent manner, right?
No, they made her look really annoying, stupid.
Yes.
Yeah. But that whole family they portrayed as being stupid, though.
Yes.
It's not like any of them. True. It's not like Al was this mental genius. Right. They were all fuck ups. Every single one of them was a fuck up. So that's why the show was funny. And they were supposed to be poverty level fuck ups is what they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
Just barely getting. He was like a shoe salesman or something.
Yeah.
Something like that. That one would have appeal for people in that same social system, and for the people to look down on them that are above them in middle class or whatever. And honestly, I don't even know. Do rich people watch TV? I wouldn't know because I'm not rich.
I don't know. Maybe they watch the soap operas.
I think they're too busy molesting girls that are too young or doing all the other things that they do because they believe they can get away with it because they're rich until the hand comes down.
Dun, 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 dun.
Exactly. I hadn't even thought about Married with Children.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Well, I mean, if you want to go that route, though, you can go back to The Simpsons. That's been on for 30 freaking years. Mm-hmm. And The Simpsons was a good representation. And anytime animation can do whatever you want. That's the nice thing, because you're not constrained by what we typically can do.
Right.
So, no, that's a good social structure because you probably know. Who doesn't know a family like The Simpsons? Or who can't see themselves in the characters of The Simpsons. And I think that's the difference probably also between the Cosby Show and Roseanne is you can see yourself in the characters in Roseanne, and you can probably see yourself in the Cosbys also, but more realistic, I can see myself in the characters in Roseanne. I don't know which one. I'd say I'm probably Darlene, the girl. But other than that, I think it's relatable to most people.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely can see, as I said, watching the early episodes of Roseanne, I can identify more with them. But as the Cosby progress in their history, I do see moments where it's okay, that I can relate to. And it felt more honest for me being a black person to see something that I can relate to. And not to say that everything that I was not brought up in with, wealth and things like that, it didn't seem like it was like absolutely unattainable, but it's just like give me something to look at eye level and allow me to get there, as opposed to just giving me this image that I'm just like, I don't even know how to get there. So let me just stay with what I know, at least for comedy purposes, because I don't think I've ever really looked at any TV show and said, oh my gosh, someone's doing that, I can do that too.
Right.
So I never really looked at TV in that way, and maybe they were trying to do that with certain shows to show that, hey, you're black, you can be a lawyer too. But
yeah, but I think a lot of it too is for some reason, a long time there during TV land time frame, they were doing a lot of rags to riches stuff. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, I guess that appeals to an American audience. Look at Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He goes from living in Philly to living in Bel-Air.
Yep.
Okay, so even though he didn't really, he didn't leave his mom per se. I mean, she's alive and fine or whatever, but it's a rags to riches thing again. Mm-hmm. Look at Silver Spoons. Okay, Ricky Schroeder, he was with his mom, now he's with his dad, now he's rich. All that Richie Rich type stuff. All those things. The Jeffersons, he was doing the dry cleaning thing and it took off and now he's rich. It seems like even though the economy is worse now, it seems like everything they did was, I know your life sucks, but watch this television show and you can fantasize that this could be you someday.
Yeah.
So, man, that almost makes me think of some government conspiracy where their government's like, here, feed the sheep. Give the sheep this.
Yeah.
Keep them where they're not upset about stuff. Let's distract them. Let's do this over here with the left hand so that they watch the left hand while the right hand is doing something else. And a lot of that, and I have this discussion quite a bit, and I say, we focus on this thing while they're doing this thing over here, and nobody focuses on this over here.
Yep.
They want to focus on Trump and his wall, Trump and his wall, Trump and the wall. Well, who gives a fuck about the wall? How about over here where the economy sucks?
Yep.
How about over here where this is going on? That's where I think it's all sleight of hand. So maybe that's what they were doing then, even though we weren't doing that bad then. Mm-hmm. We're doing far worse now. Mm-hmm. So maybe that was part of it. Let's sit back and fantasize, sheep, and watch this. And if it was Dallas and Dynasty, where they're back to back, well, that's 2 hours you can fantasize about being something else.
Yep.
And that's when they had the shows like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, where they're showing all these, look at these beautiful homes with Robin Leach, and you can just sit back and forget about your mundane, shitty life. I think maybe in an episode of Roseanne, they might have been watching an episode of Lifestyle, whatever. So that's possible. Could rack that up to a conspiracy theory. Yeah. But again, conspiracy theories. If you make a conspiracy theory, I think a lot of conspiracy theories, and maybe this is a conspiracy, probably a lot of conspiracy theories are started so that we don't see what's actually going on also. Because it's easier to blame a conspiracy and say, oh, this is a conspiracy about this, and really focus on that when the other hand is doing something also.
Very true.
Yeah. Hey.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. What do you think, Paper Doc? I think that's completely, that's probably not true. You see, the government is out to watch over us, Beaverman. And it's Beaveman, not Beaverman. Oh, but I digress. They're here to watch over us.
And support all.
White Americans. And if you keep talking the way you're talking, who knows? Someone might throw a bag over your head and throw you into a car, if you know what I mean. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So what you're saying is you're going to dime me out. Well, I hate to tell you this, Paper Doc. This gets heard by people all over the world. All one of them. So, I do not respond to your threats, Paper Doc. Just remember who made you. I made you, and I can break you. Fair enough? Enough said. Do you have anything else to add there, Tromondae?
I don't. It was a good conversation today.
All right, so I will, unlike doing the episodes with Doc, where it takes me 2.5 hours to remove all of his coughing, I'm quite sure I'll be able to get this one out. I'll quite be able to get this one out much, much sooner. All right, so as always, thank you for listening. share our podcast so that someday I won't have to do anything except talking to a microphone. That's probably not going to happen, but hey, let's give it a shot anyway. And as always, from me, the Beaveman, adios, much fuckos. Say goodbye, Tromondae.
Peace, love, and soul. That's from Soul Train. We should talk about music next.
Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah, my choices of music. That should be fun. All right. And goodbye.
Pika pika.